My name is Elena Rodriguez, and at 31 years old, I thought I understood what family loyalty meant. That was before I discovered my parents had used the $50,000 I gave them for debt relief to buy my younger brother a brand new BMW instead. When I confronted them about it, they casually explained that Marcus needed reliable transportation for his new job, as if my financial sacrifice was just another family resource to redistribute according to their priorities. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The betrayal I felt in that moment would drive me to make decisions that fundamentally changed not only my relationship with my family, but my understanding of self-worth, boundaries, and what it truly means to build a life based on authentic values rather than misplaced obligation. Before I tell you how this shocking discovery led to the most transformative period of my life, let me know where you are watching from and subscribe if stories about setting financial boundaries and reclaiming your power resonate with your own journey towards self-respect and authentic relationships. The morning I discovered the truth began like countless others in my downtown Seattle apartment, with coffee brewing and the familiar weight of financial responsibility settling over my shoulders as I reviewed my investment portfolio on my laptop. As a senior software engineer at a prominent tech company, I had worked methodically to build financial security that my immigrant parents had never experienced. Every dollar saved and invested represented not just personal achievement, but a promise to myself that I would never experience the financial anxiety that had defined my childhood. My relationship with money had been shaped by watching my parents struggle through decades of economic uncertainty, working multiple jobs while raising 3 children in a cramped rental house where every expense required careful calculation and frequent sacrifice. My father, Roberto Rodriguez, had arrived from El Salvador with an engineering degree that American employers refused to recognize, forcing him into construction work that paid bills but never provided the professional respect he deserved. My mother, Carmen Rodriguez, cleaned office buildings during night shifts while caring for us during the day, her exhaustion a constant presence that taught me early lessons about the cost of financial instability. These experiences had instilled in me an almost obsessive drive toward financial independence that guided every major decision throughout my 20s. While classmates accumulated student debt, I worked part-time jobs and applied for every available scholarship. While colleagues spent discretionary income on entertainment and travel, I maximized retirement contributions and built emergency savings that could sustain me through any economic downturn. The discipline was sometimes isolating, but it provided the security I craved and positioned me to help my family when they needed support. The phone call that would change everything came on a Tuesday evening in October, while I was reviewing quarterly financial statements. My mother's voice carried the familiar strain that accompanied family financial crises, though this time the circumstances seemed more serious than previous emergencies. She explained that they had fallen behind on mortgage payments due to my father's recent medical expenses following a minor heart attack that had forced him to take unpaid leave from his construction job. The situation was complicated by accumulated credit card debt that had grown during the months when my father's income was reduced and medical bills exceeded their insurance coverage. According to my mother's careful explanation, they owed approximately $45,000 in various debts and were facing potential foreclosure proceedings that could result in losing the modest house they had purchased 15 years earlier. The request for help was not entirely unexpected, as I had provided smaller amounts of financial assistance during previous family crises without expecting repayment. However, the scale of this situation required a more substantial response that would impact my own financial planning significantly. After reviewing their documentation and confirming the accuracy of their claims, I agreed to provide $50,000 for my investment accounts to resolve their debt crisis and provide a small buffer for future emergencies. The decision was not made lightly, as it represented nearly 2 years of aggressive saving and careful investment growth that I had intended to use for purchasing my own home. Yet the alternative of watching my parents lose their house seemed unacceptable when I possessed the resources to prevent such a devastating outcome. The money would come from my taxable investment accounts rather than retirement funds, meaning I would face capital gains tax consequences, but the urgency of their situation made such considerations secondary to family obligation. I structured the assistance as a gift rather than a loan to avoid creating additional financial pressure on my parents while they recovered from this crisis. The legal documentation was minimal, consisting primarily of gift tax forms that ensured compliance with federal regulations. My only explicit request was that they use the money specifically for debt relief and mortgage payments rather than other expenses that might arise during their financial recovery period. The transfer occurred through a series of electronic transactions that moved the funds from my investment accounts to their checking account over the course of 3 business days. My parents expressed profound gratitude during multiple phone conversations, with my father becoming emotional as he described the relief of no longer facing foreclosure proceedings. My mother sent a handwritten thank you note that detailed how the gift would allow them to stabilize their financial situation and begin rebuilding their credit rating. For approximately 6 weeks following the transfer, our family relationships seemed stronger than they had been in years. My parents called regularly to update me on their progress in negotiating with creditors and establishing payment plans for remaining obligations. My younger brother Marcus, who was 26 and had recently graduated from college with a degree in marketing, seemed particularly grateful for my intervention in what he described as a family crisis that had been causing him significant stress about his parents' well-being. The first indication that something was amiss came during a casual phone conversation with my sister Isabella, who mentioned seeing Marcus driving a car she did not recognize when he picked her up for lunch the previous weekend. According to her description, the vehicle was a silver sedan that appeared to be relatively new, though she had not paid close attention to the specific make or model. When I asked Marcus about it during our next conversation, he explained that his previous car had experienced mechanical problems that made replacement necessary. The explanation seemed reasonable given that Marcus had been driving a 15-year-old Honda Civic that had required increasing frequent repairs over the past year. However, something about his tone during that conversation suggested he was withholding information, though I could not identify specific inconsistencies in his account. The feeling was subtle but persistent, creating a nagging concern that I initially dismissed as unnecessary suspicion about a legitimate car purchase. My growing unease led me to ask more detailed questions about the family's financial recovery during subsequent conversations with my parents. Their responses were generally positive, indicating that they had successfully negotiated payment plans with their major creditors and were no longer facing immediate foreclosure threats. However, I noticed that they seemed less forthcoming about specific details than they had been immediately following my financial assistance. The truth emerged through an accidental discovery that would forever change my understanding of family dynamics and financial boundaries. While visiting my parents' house for Sunday dinner in late November, I noticed a BMW key fob on the kitchen counter that seemed inconsistent with any vehicle I knew them to own. When I asked about it, my father initially claimed it belonged to a neighbor who had stopped by earlier, but his explanation was delivered with obvious discomfort that suggested fabrication. My mother's response to the same question contradicted my father's account, as she mentioned that Marcus had left his keys when he borrowed her car for a doctor's appointment. The inconsistency was glaring and created an uncomfortable silence that none of us seemed able to address directly. Rather than pursue the matter further in that moment, I decided to investigate independently to understand what was clearly a deceptive situation. The investigation required minimal effort, as Marcus had posted photographs on social media featuring himself with a brand new BMW 3 Series that he had apparently purchased within the previous month. The images showed him at the dealership during what appeared to be a delivery ceremony, with sales staff and family members celebrating the acquisition of what was obviously an expensive vehicle. One photograph included a caption expressing gratitude to his parents for their support in making the purchase possible. The evidence was undeniable and devastating in its clarity. The $50,000 I had provided for debt relief had been redirected to purchase my brother a luxury vehicle worth approximately $45,000. The remaining funds had presumably been used for associated expenses such as insurance, registration, and other costs related to the vehicle purchase. None of the money had been applied to the debt relief purposes I had intended when making the transfer. Confronting my parents about this discovery required several days of emotional preparation, as I struggled to process the magnitude of their deception and its implications for our relationship. The betrayal was not simply financial but represented a fundamental violation of trust that called into question every assumption I had made about family loyalty and mutual respect. The conversation that would follow would force all of us to confront uncomfortable truths about money, obligation, and the difference between genuine need and manipulative exploitation. The Sunday evening when I finally addressed the situation directly marked the beginning of a transformation that would ultimately teach me invaluable lessons about boundaries, self-respect, and the difference between supporting family members and enabling their irresponsible behavior. The journey that followed would be painful but necessary, leading to a fundamentally healthier understanding of what authentic family relationships require and how financial boundaries serve everyone's long-term interests. The shock of discovering that my generous gift had been converted into a luxury purchase for my brother, while my parents' actual debts remained unresolved, would catalyze changes in my life that extended far beyond financial matters. The experience would teach me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family members is to refuse to participate in patterns that prevent them from developing personal responsibility and genuine self-reliance. What happened next would challenge every assumption I had made about family obligation and force me to rebuild relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. The path forward would require courage I did not know I possessed and lead to discoveries about my own worth that would transform not only my family relationships but my entire approach to living an authentic and purposeful life. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Growing up in the Rodriguez household meant understanding your role in an intricate family ecosystem where love was measured through sacrifice and worthiness was determined by how much burden you could shoulder without complaint. I had unknowingly accepted the position of family safety net from an early age, a role that felt natural and necessary until the BMW incident forced me to examine the psychological architecture that had been constructed around my financial capability and emotional generosity. The dynamics had been subtle in their development, emerging through thousands of small interactions that gradually shaped expectations and responses across decades of family relationships. My academic excellence in elementary school had been met with pride, but also with immediate assumptions about my future responsibility to help support the family once I achieved professional success. My teenage jobs were celebrated not for teaching me work ethic or independence, but for demonstrating my commitment to contributing to household expenses when needed. Marcus, by contrast, had been nurtured in an entirely different emotional climate that emphasized his potential rather than his obligations. Born 5 years after me, he had arrived during a period when my parents' financial situation had stabilized slightly, allowing them to approach his upbringing with less anxiety about immediate survival and more focus on protecting his childhood from the harsh realities that had shaped my early experiences. The difference in our treatment had been rationalized through various explanations that seemed reasonable on their surface but created fundamentally different expectations for our adult relationships with the family. Marcus was characterized as more sensitive, requiring gentle encouragement rather than the direct challenges that had motivated my academic and professional achievements. His artistic interests in music and creative writing were celebrated as evidence of his refined nature, while my practical focus on mathematics and science was appreciated but considered less remarkable. These patterns had crystallized during our teenage years when family financial crises became my responsibility to help solve through part-time work and academic scholarships, while Marcus was shielded from such concerns to preserve his focus on creative development and social relationships. I learned to anticipate financial needs and offer assistance before being asked, while Marcus learned that such problems would be handled by others without requiring his attention or contribution. The college years had reinforced these dynamics as my parents expressed pride in my scholarship achievements and career-focused academic choices, while simultaneously expressing concern about Marcus's less practical educational path. Yet their concern never translated into expectations that he develop financial responsibility or contribute to family expenses. Instead, they sought additional ways to support his artistic pursuits while assuming that my practical success would eventually provide security for the entire family. Isabella, our middle sibling, had occupied a somewhat neutral position in these dynamics, though she had learned to navigate family relationships by avoiding financial discussions entirely and focusing on emotional support that did not require material contribution. Her approach had allowed her to maintain close relationships with all family members while avoiding the burden of financial responsibility that had been allocated to me or the protective treatment that had been extended to Marcus. The pattern had become so normalized that I had never questioned its fundamental fairness or sustainability. My financial contributions to family emergencies had been framed as expressions of love and gratitude rather than one-sided obligations that created resentment and exploitation. The asymmetrical expectations had been presented as natural consequences of our different capabilities and circumstances, rather than chosen arrangements that could be modified through honest communication. Marcus's transition to adulthood had been facilitated through extensive family support that included financial assistance for college expenses, help finding his first apartment, and ongoing emotional encouragement that assumed his eventual success without requiring immediate demonstration of responsibility or independence. My own transition had been marked by immediate expectations of self-sufficiency and rapid progression toward family support capability. The psychological impact of these different treatment patterns had been profound, though largely unconscious, until the BMW incident forced me to examine their long-term consequences. I had internalized the belief that my worth within the family was primarily determined by my ability to solve problems and provide resources when needed. My sense of identity had become intertwined with being the reliable family member who could be counted on during crises. Marcus had developed a different relationship with family support that assumed assistance would be available when needed without requiring reciprocal contribution or acknowledgement of the sacrifice involved. His perspective on the $50,000 gift reflected this fundamental difference in understanding family financial relationships. From his viewpoint, the money was a family resource that could legitimately be redirected toward his transportation needs, which were framed as benefiting the entire family through his improved employment prospects. The revelation about the BMW purchase had forced me to confront the possibility that my parents viewed my financial contributions not as generous gifts but as expected support that they could allocate according to their judgment of family priorities. The lack of consultation about redirecting the money suggested that they did not consider my intentions or preferences relevant to their decision-making process about how to utilize resources I had provided. This realization was devastating because it revealed that my perception of family relationships as reciprocal and respectful was not shared by other family members who viewed my financial capability as a resource they could access and direct according to their needs. The gratitude they had expressed for my assistance had been genuine but was not accompanied by the commitment to honor my intentions or acknowledge my sacrifice that I had assumed was implicit in our transaction. The confrontation that followed my discovery of the BMW purchase became a watershed moment that exposed years of accumulated resentment and misunderstanding about family financial responsibilities. My parents' initial response was defensive rather than apologetic, suggesting that they viewed my concerns as unreasonable given that the money had been used to benefit a family member who needed reliable transportation for employment purposes. Their explanation revealed a fundamental disconnect in our understanding of gift-giving, financial boundaries, and family obligation that went far beyond the immediate circumstances of the BMW purchase. From their perspective, my financial success created a responsibility to support family members according to their assessment of needs and priorities. From my perspective, my financial assistance should be used for the specific purposes we had discussed and agreed upon. The conversation escalated as I attempted to express my feelings of betrayal and disrespect, while my parents defended their decision as reasonable resource allocation that served the family's overall interests. Marcus's involvement in the discussion was limited, but revealed his assumption that the car purchase was a logical use of available funds rather than a violation of trust that warranted apology or acknowledgement. The emotional intensity of this confrontation forced all of us to articulate assumptions and expectations that had remained unspoken for decades. The discussion revealed that my parents had been operating under the belief that my financial success obligated me to support family members indefinitely without expecting consultation about how such support was utilized. They had interpreted my previous assistance as establishing a precedent for ongoing financial responsibility rather than as individual responses to specific circumstances. This revelation transformed my understanding of family relationships and forced me to examine the psychological patterns that had made such exploitation possible. The people-pleasing tendencies I had developed during childhood had evolved into adult relationship patterns that prioritized others' comfort over my own well-being. The desire to be seen as generous and supportive had created vulnerability to manipulation that I had not recognized until it was exploited so blatantly. The aftermath of this confrontation initiated a period of intense self-reflection that would ultimately lead to fundamental changes in how I approached family relationships and personal boundaries. The pain of discovering that my generosity had been taken for granted and redirected without my consent catalyzed a transformation that went far beyond financial matters to encompass my entire understanding of self-worth and authentic relationships. The realization that emerged from this crisis was both liberating and terrifying. I understood that the family dynamics I had accepted as normal were actually dysfunctional patterns that prevented genuine intimacy and mutual respect. The protective role I had assumed was not helping my family members develop independence and responsibility, but was enabling dependency and entitlement that ultimately served no one's long-term interests. The decision that crystallized during the weeks following this confrontation would require courage I had never before needed to demonstrate. I would need to establish boundaries that prioritized my own well-being while maintaining relationships with family members who had become accustomed to my unlimited availability and support. The transformation that followed would teach me invaluable lessons about the difference between love and obligation, generosity and enabling, family loyalty and personal integrity. The journey ahead would be difficult but necessary, leading to a fundamental reconstruction of family relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. The pain of this discovery would ultimately become the catalyst for building a life that honored both my love for my family and my responsibility to maintain healthy boundaries that protected my emotional and financial well-being. The weeks following my confrontation with my parents felt like living in emotional purgatory, suspended between the family relationships I had always known and the uncertain territory of enforcing boundaries I had never needed to establish. Sleep became elusive as my mind replayed decades of interactions through a new lens, identifying patterns of manipulation and exploitation that I had previously interpreted as normal family dynamics. My apartment, once a sanctuary of personal achievement and carefully curated comfort, now felt like a fortress of solitude where I processed the magnitude of betrayal while struggling to maintain professional performance at work. The cognitive dissonance between my public success as a senior software engineer and my private humiliation as a financially exploited family member created internal tension that manifested in physical symptoms I had never experienced before. The immigrant narrative that had shaped my family's identity included deeply embedded beliefs about intergenerational obligation that complicated my efforts to establish healthy boundaries around financial support. My parents had sacrificed tremendously to provide opportunities for their children, working multiple jobs while navigating language barriers and cultural differences that made every achievement more difficult than it would have been for families with established American networks and resources. Their sacrifices had been real and substantial, creating legitimate gratitude that made it difficult to distinguish between appropriate appreciation and manipulative guilt when they referenced their hardships during conversations about family financial responsibilities. The cultural framework within which we operated emphasized collective family success over individual boundaries, making my concerns about personal financial autonomy seem selfish rather than reasonable. This cultural complexity was compounded by economic realities that made financial interdependence seem necessary rather than optional. My parents' limited retirement savings and ongoing medical expenses created genuine needs that would require family support regardless of the BMW incident. The challenge was distinguishing between legitimate assistance and the exploitation that had characterized the misuse of my $50,000 gift. The social isolation that accompanied this family crisis surprised me with its intensity and scope. Friends and colleagues who inquired about my obvious distress received carefully edited explanations that avoided the humiliating details of financial betrayal while maintaining professional relationships that could not accommodate the emotional processing I desperately needed. The gap between my public competence and private vulnerability felt unbridgeable. Professional therapy became necessary when my attempts at independent emotional processing proved insufficient for the complexity of family dynamics I was attempting to understand and modify. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a licensed clinical social worker specializing in family systems and financial therapy, provided the objective perspective and practical frameworks I needed to develop healthy responses to decades of dysfunctional patterns. The therapeutic process revealed that my people-pleasing tendencies and conflict avoidance had been established during childhood as survival mechanisms for navigating family financial stress and parental anxiety. The hypervigilance I had developed around family emotional states had evolved into adult relationship patterns that prioritized others' comfort over my own well-being, creating vulnerability to exploitation that extended beyond family relationships into professional and romantic contexts. Dr. Mitchell introduced concepts of financial boundaries and emotional differentiation that provided language for experiences I had never been able to articulate clearly. The distinction between supporting family members and enabling their irresponsible behavior became clearer through exercises that helped me identify my motivations for financial assistance and evaluate the outcomes of previous help I had provided. The therapeutic exploration revealed that my financial generosity had been motivated by complex factors including genuine love for my family, desire to avoid conflict, need for approval and recognition, guilt about my own success, and unconscious attempts to control family dynamics through resource provision. These mixed motivations had prevented me from establishing clear expectations about how my assistance would be used and what boundaries needed to be maintained to preserve healthy relationships. The revelation that my generosity had been partially motivated by control and approval-seeking was initially difficult to accept, as it challenged my self-perception as a purely altruistic family member who sacrificed without expectation of reciprocation. The therapeutic process helped me understand that healthy generosity required clear boundaries and honest communication about expectations rather than unlimited self-sacrifice that ultimately served no one's long-term interests. Meanwhile, my family's response to my withdrawal from regular communication and immediate financial availability created pressure that tested my commitment to establishing healthier relationship patterns. Phone calls from my mother increased in frequency and emotional intensity as she expressed confusion about my changed behavior and concern about the family discord my boundary setting was creating. Marcus's reaction revealed the extent to which he had internalized assumptions about my ongoing financial support without recognizing the sacrifice involved or the need for gratitude and reciprocity. His casual attitude toward the BMW purchase and resistance to acknowledging any wrongdoing demonstrated how thoroughly he had accepted the family dynamic that positioned my resources as available for his benefit without consultation or appreciation. Isabella's position as the middle sibling created unique challenges as she attempted to maintain relationships with all family members while avoiding taking sides in the conflict. Her efforts at mediation were well-intentioned but often reinforced the dysfunctional patterns by encouraging me to overlook the BMW incident for the sake of family harmony rather than addressing the underlying issues that had made such exploitation possible. The pressure to resume normal family relationships intensified during the holiday season, when traditional gatherings and gift exchanges highlighted the tension that my boundary setting had created. My parents' expectation that I would participate in family celebrations as if nothing had changed revealed their failure to understand the seriousness of the BMW incident and the need for genuine accountability before rebuilding trust. The decision to limit my participation in holiday activities was emotionally difficult but necessary for maintaining the boundaries I was establishing around financial and emotional exploitation. The guilt and sadness I experienced during this period were profound, as I grieved the loss of family relationships that had provided identity and belonging despite their dysfunctional characteristics. Professional success provided some stability during this period of family crisis, as my technical skills and project management capabilities continued to generate recognition and advancement opportunities that reinforced my sense of competence and value outside of family dynamics. The contrast between workplace appreciation and family exploitation became more apparent as I learned to distinguish between environments that valued my contributions and relationships that took advantage of my generosity. The financial planning process became an opportunity to reassess my long-term goals and priorities in light of the changed family dynamics. The $50,000 I had given to my parents represented a significant setback in my home ownership timeline, but it also provided valuable information about the risks of unlimited family financial support that would inform future decision-making. Working with a financial advisor who specialized in family financial planning helped me develop strategies for supporting family members when appropriate while protecting my own financial security and long-term goals. The advisor emphasized that financial boundaries were not selfish but necessary for sustainable generosity that served everyone's interests over time. The development of a formal family financial policy document became a therapeutic exercise that forced me to articulate my values, limits, and expectations around future financial assistance. The process of writing these policies helped clarify my thinking about appropriate responses to family financial requests while providing a framework for consistent decision-making that would not be influenced by emotional manipulation or crisis pressure. The document included specific criteria for evaluating requests for financial assistance, requirements for transparency about how funds would be used, expectations for communication and appreciation, and consequences for misuse of resources that would protect my interests while maintaining family relationships when possible. The implementation of these policies would require courage and consistency that I was still developing, as my historical patterns of immediate compliance with family requests had created expectations that would be difficult to modify. The therapeutic process provided ongoing support for maintaining boundaries despite pressure and guilt that accompanied any change in established family dynamics. The realization that emerged from this period of intensive self-examination was both liberating and sobering. I understood that the family relationships I had cherished were built on fundamental inequality and exploitation that prevented genuine intimacy and mutual respect. The love I felt for my family members was authentic, but the dynamics within which that love was expressed had become harmful to everyone involved. The choice before me was clear, though not easy. I could continue enabling dysfunctional patterns while gradually losing my financial security and emotional well-being, or I could establish boundaries that might preserve my resources and dignity while risking significant changes in family relationships that had provided identity and belonging throughout my life. The path forward would require unprecedented courage and commitment to my own well-being, but the alternative of continued exploitation seemed far more dangerous than the uncertainty of healthier relationships. The transformation that was beginning would ultimately teach me that authentic love sometimes requires saying no to requests that harm rather than help the people we care about most. The corporate office environment that had once provided refuge from family complications now felt like another stage where I performed competence while internally wrestling with the realization that my entire adult identity had been constructed around solving other people's problems. The irony was not lost on me that my professional success in software engineering, which involved identifying systemic issues and implementing sustainable solutions, had not prepared me to recognize the dysfunctional systems operating within my own family relationships. My cubicle workspace, decorated with awards for technical excellence and leadership recognition, served as a daily reminder of capabilities I had developed through years of disciplined effort and strategic thinking. Yet these same analytical skills that had advanced my career had been systematically disabled when applied to family financial requests, which I had approached with emotion-driven decision-making that bypassed the careful evaluation I applied to every other significant aspect of my life. The pattern of family financial crisis followed by my immediate intervention had become so automatic that I had never paused to examine whether my assistance was actually solving underlying problems or merely providing temporary relief that enabled continued irresponsible behavior. The BMW incident had forced me to confront the possibility that my generosity was perpetuating dysfunction rather than promoting genuine family stability and growth. This realization extended beyond financial matters to encompass my entire approach to family relationships, which had been built around anticipating needs and providing solutions before problems became crises. I had positioned myself as the family emergency response system, available for immediate deployment whenever difficulties arose, without recognizing that this role prevented other family members from developing their own problem-solving capabilities and personal responsibility. The psychological analysis I was conducting through therapy revealed that my identity as the family problem solver had been reinforced through decades of positive feedback that confused enabling behavior with genuine helpfulness. My parents' expressions of gratitude and relief when I resolved their financial difficulties had provided emotional satisfaction that masked the harmful long-term consequences of my intervention patterns. Marcus had particularly benefited from this dynamic, as my willingness to provide financial safety nets had allowed him to pursue creative interests and career exploration without experiencing the natural consequences of his choices. The BMW purchase represented the logical conclusion of years of protection from financial reality that had prevented him from developing adult responsibility and authentic independence. Isabella's position within this system had been more subtle but equally problematic, as she had learned to navigate family relationships by remaining emotionally supportive while avoiding any financial responsibility. Her role as the sympathetic listener and mediator allowed her to maintain positive relationships with all family members while contributing nothing to the practical resolution of ongoing problems. The family dynamics had created a closed system where my financial success generated resources that were redistributed according to other people's priorities and preferences without meaningful input from me about appropriate use or long-term consequences. The gratitude expressed for my assistance had been genuine but temporary, quickly forgotten when new needs arose that required additional intervention. The cultural framework within which these patterns operated included assumptions about successful family members' obligations to support extended family networks that made individual boundary setting seem selfish and culturally inappropriate. The immigrant experience had created legitimate interdependence that was difficult to distinguish from exploitation without careful analysis of motivations and outcomes. Professional therapy provided frameworks for understanding these cultural complexities while developing strategies for maintaining family connections without sacrificing personal financial security or emotional well-being. Dr. Mitchell helped me recognize that healthy cultural values around family support could coexist with appropriate boundaries that protected everyone's long-term interests. The therapeutic process revealed that my tendency to assume responsibility for other people's problems had extended beyond family relationships into professional and social contexts, where I consistently volunteered for additional responsibilities and provided assistance that was not reciprocated. This pattern had contributed to career advancement, but had also created relationships where my value was primarily utilitarian rather than genuinely personal. The recognition that I had been functioning as other people's solution rather than developing authentic relationships based on mutual interest and shared experiences was profoundly disturbing but ultimately liberating. The realization provided clarity about why I felt emotionally exhausted despite professional success and financial security that should have created satisfaction and confidence. The decision to establish formal boundaries around family financial assistance required developing new communication skills that I had never needed when my automatic response was immediate compliance with requests for help. Learning to say no to family members required practice and emotional preparation that felt foreign after decades of people-pleasing behavior that had become second nature. The first test of my new boundaries came when my father called to request assistance with car repairs that he claimed were necessary for his continued employment. The request was for $1,500, a relatively modest amount that would have previously triggered automatic agreement without detailed discussion of alternatives or long-term implications. Instead of immediate compliance, I implemented the evaluation criteria I had developed through therapy, asking specific questions about the necessity of the repairs, alternative sources of funding, and plans for preventing similar situations in the future. The conversation was uncomfortable for both of us, as my father was unprepared for resistance to what he considered a reasonable request given my historical willingness to provide such assistance. The resistance I encountered revealed the extent to which my family had become dependent on my financial intervention for problems that could be addressed through their own resources or alternative solutions. My father's frustration with my questions demonstrated that he had not developed contingency plans for vehicle maintenance despite knowing that car repairs were predictable expenses for aging vehicles. The emotional manipulation that accompanied this resistance was subtle but consistent with patterns I was learning to recognize through therapy. References to my parents' sacrifices for my education, expressions of disappointment about my changed attitude toward family assistance, and suggestions that my success had made me selfish were all designed to trigger guilt that would override my rational evaluation of the request. The strength required to maintain boundaries despite this emotional pressure was greater than I had anticipated, as my historical identity as the helpful family member was deeply intertwined with my sense of self-worth and belonging. Saying no to family requests felt like rejecting fundamental aspects of my personality and cultural identity that had provided meaning and purpose throughout my adult life. The aftermath of declining this first request created family tension that tested my commitment to boundary maintenance while revealing additional aspects of the dysfunctional dynamics I had been enabling. My mother's phone calls increased in frequency and emotional intensity as she attempted to understand my changed behavior while pressuring me to resume my previous role as the family financial safety net. The family conference call that was arranged to address my new attitude provided additional evidence of how thoroughly my relatives had internalized assumptions about my availability for financial assistance without reciprocal obligation or appreciation. The conversation revealed that they viewed my boundary setting as temporary rebellion rather than permanent change that required adjustment in their own financial planning and problem-solving approaches. Marcus's participation in this family meeting was particularly revealing, as he expressed genuine confusion about why I was creating complications around family financial assistance that had previously been straightforward. His inability to recognize the BMW incident as a violation of trust demonstrated how completely he had accepted the dynamic where my resources were available for his benefit without meaningful consultation or gratitude. The emotional toll of maintaining boundaries while family members applied increasing pressure to resume previous patterns created stress that manifested in physical symptoms including insomnia, digestive problems, and tension headaches that required medical attention. The realization that family relationships were literally making me sick provided additional motivation for continuing the boundary-setting process despite its difficulty. The support group for adult children of immigrant families that Dr. Mitchell recommended provided connection with others who were navigating similar cultural complexities around family obligation and individual autonomy. The shared experiences and strategies discussed in these meetings reinforced that my struggles were not unique and that healthy boundary setting was possible while maintaining family relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided obligation. The group members shared stories of financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, and cultural guilt that closely paralleled my own experiences, providing validation that my concerns were legitimate rather than selfish. The diversity of strategies that different members had developed for addressing similar family dynamics expanded my understanding of possible approaches to relationship modification that honored both individual needs and family connections. The gradual recognition that my family's resistance to my boundary setting was evidence of the dysfunction I was addressing rather than proof that my new approach was wrong provided psychological foundation for continuing the difficult process of relationship transformation. The discomfort they experienced as I withdrew my automatic financial assistance forced them to confront their own dependency patterns and develop alternative problem-solving capabilities. The escalation in family pressure following my refusal to fund my father's car repairs revealed sophisticated manipulation tactics that I had never recognized during decades of automatic compliance with financial requests. The conversations that followed my boundary setting demonstrated how thoroughly my relatives had internalized assumptions about my obligations while developing strategies for overcoming resistance when their initial requests were not immediately granted. My mother's approach involved emotional appeals that referenced her declining health, increased medical expenses, and concerns about burdening her children with financial problems that might force them to work additional years before retirement. These conversations were carefully structured to emphasize her vulnerability, while subtly suggesting that my refusal to provide assistance was contributing to stress that could worsen her medical conditions. The sophistication of this manipulation became apparent when I realized that she consistently contacted me during evening hours when I would be tired from work and less capable of maintaining analytical distance from emotional appeals. The timing was not coincidental but represented strategic thinking about when I would be most susceptible to guilt-based persuasion that had proven effective throughout our relationship history. Marcus employed different tactics that focused on family unity and shared responsibility for supporting our parents during their senior years. His arguments emphasized that my financial success created obligations to ensure family stability that transcended individual preferences about how resources should be utilized. The BMW incident was reframed as a misunderstanding rather than betrayal, with suggestions that my reaction was disproportionate to the actual harm caused. The gaslighting aspects of these conversations became more apparent as I developed better recognition of manipulation techniques through continued therapy and support group participation. Family members consistently minimized the significance of the BMW purchase while suggesting that my emotional response indicated underlying psychological problems that required adjustment rather than legitimate grievances that deserved acknowledgement and resolution. Isabella's role in these dynamics proved particularly complex, as she maintained her position as family mediator while subtly reinforcing the pressure for me to resume my previous financial support patterns. Her conversations included expressions of concern about family harmony and suggestions that my boundary setting was creating unnecessary conflict that could be resolved through compromise and understanding. The compromise proposals that emerged from these family discussions consistently involved me providing financial assistance with slightly modified terms rather than genuine recognition of the boundary violations that had necessitated my changed approach. The suggested modifications were superficial adjustments that would not address the fundamental power imbalances and exploitation patterns that had created the current crisis. Professional therapy provided essential support during this period of sustained family pressure that tested my commitment to boundary maintenance while revealing additional layers of dysfunction that had been operating beneath the surface of apparently loving family relationships. Dr. Mitchell helped me recognize that the intensity of resistance I was encountering actually validated the necessity of the boundaries I was establishing. The therapeutic exploration revealed that healthy families respond to boundary setting with curiosity and respect rather than manipulation and pressure designed to restore previous patterns that serve their interests while harming the boundary setter. The family's inability to acknowledge my legitimate concerns about financial exploitation indicated fundamental problems with empathy and mutual respect that extended far beyond the immediate BMW incident. The support group sessions provided additional perspective from individuals who had navigated similar family dynamics while establishing sustainable relationships that honored both cultural values and individual autonomy. The shared experiences reinforced that family resistance to boundary setting was predictable and temporary, typically decreasing as relatives recognized that manipulation tactics were no longer effective. One group member shared her experience of family financial exploitation that had continued for 15 years before she developed sufficient courage to establish boundaries that initially created significant conflict but ultimately resulted in healthier relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided obligation. Her story provided hope that the current difficulty was temporary rather than permanent condition. Another member described how his family's resistance to his boundary setting had revealed their view of him as a financial resource rather than a complete person whose emotional well-being and personal goals deserved consideration. The recognition of this dynamic had been painful but ultimately liberating, as it allowed him to build authentic relationships with family members who genuinely cared about his welfare. The workplace environment provided crucial stability during this period of family upheaval, as professional relationships operated according to clear expectations and reciprocal benefits that contrasted sharply with the exploitation patterns I was addressing in personal relationships. The respect and recognition I received for technical expertise and leadership capabilities reinforced my sense of competence and value during moments when family dynamics created doubt about my worth. The Employee Assistance Program offered through my company provided access to financial counseling that helped me develop comprehensive strategies for protecting my economic security while maintaining appropriate family support that served everyone's long-term interests. The counselor emphasized that financial boundaries were essential for sustainable generosity that could continue throughout my career rather than depleting resources that would ultimately reduce my capacity to provide meaningful assistance. The development of a formal investment strategy that prioritized my own retirement security and home ownership goals provided psychological foundation for maintaining boundaries despite family pressure. The financial advisor helped me calculate the long-term cost of continued unlimited family financial support, demonstrating that such patterns would prevent me from achieving personal goals while potentially creating dependency that served no one's interests. The home purchase process that I initiated during this period represented both practical progress toward personal goals and symbolic assertion of my right to prioritize my own needs despite family expectations that my resources should be available for their utilization. The mortgage application process required documentation of financial stability that would be jeopardized by continued pattern of large family financial gifts. The family's reaction to my home purchase announcement revealed additional aspects of their exploitative attitudes, as they expressed concern about my ability to maintain mortgage payments while continuing to provide family financial assistance when needed. The implication that my personal financial commitments should be secondary to their potential needs demonstrated their fundamental misunderstanding of appropriate family financial relationships. The house hunting process provided therapeutic benefit through focus on my own preferences and priorities rather than other people's needs and expectations that had dominated my decision-making for decades. The selection of neighborhood, architectural style, and interior features represented authentic choices about how I wanted to live rather than strategic decisions designed to maximize my capacity to support other people's goals. The physical exhaustion that accompanied this period of sustained boundary enforcement required medical attention when stress-related symptoms including chronic headaches, digestive problems, and sleep disruption began affecting my work performance and overall quality of life. The physician confirmed that these symptoms were consistent with prolonged stress from relationship conflict while recommending stress management techniques and lifestyle modifications. The medical consultation reinforced that family relationships were literally damaging my health, providing additional motivation for maintaining boundaries despite the emotional difficulty of reduced family connection. The physician's recommendation to prioritize stress reduction validated my boundary-setting efforts while highlighting the serious health consequences of continued exposure to manipulative family dynamics. The decision to limit family contact during the home purchase process was necessary for maintaining focus on personal goals while avoiding manipulation designed to redirect my attention toward family needs that could interfere with my housing timeline. The reduced communication created additional family tension but provided essential space for completing major life decisions without external pressure. The realization that emerged during this period was that love had been weaponized within my family relationships, with expressions of care and concern consistently followed by requests for resources or compliance with expectations that served others' interests while harming my well-being. The pattern had been so thoroughly normalized that I had never recognized the conditional nature of family affection that was withdrawn or modified when I failed to meet financial expectations. The distinction between genuine love and manipulative control became clearer through observation of how family members responded to my boundary-setting efforts. Authentic care would have included concern for my emotional well-being and respect for my personal goals, while the pressure I encountered focused exclusively on restoring my availability for financial exploitation without consideration of the costs I was bearing. The therapeutic process helped me understand that healthy family relationships could coexist with appropriate boundaries that protected everyone's long-term interests while building authentic connections based on mutual care rather than resource extraction. The current conflict was creating opportunity for genuine relationship improvement if family members could develop respect for my autonomy and personal goals. The courage required to maintain boundaries despite sustained pressure and guilt was greater than I had anticipated, but the alternative of returning to exploitative patterns seemed far more dangerous than the temporary discomfort of relationship transformation. The journey toward authentic family relationships would require continued commitment to my own well-being while remaining open to genuine reconciliation based on mutual respect rather than one-sided obligation. The morning I received the call from my father threatening to disown me marked the culmination of months of escalating family pressure that had transformed from subtle guilt-based manipulation into overt emotional warfare designed to force my compliance with their financial expectations. The conversation occurred at 6:30 on a Wednesday morning, deliberately timed to catch me before work when defensive capabilities would be compromised by the disorientation of unexpected early morning contact. His opening statement dispensed with pleasantries and launched directly into character assassination that accused me of selfishness, cultural betrayal, and abandonment of family values that had been instilled through decades of parental sacrifice. The intensity and specificity of his verbal attack suggested careful preparation rather than spontaneous emotional expression, indicating coordination with other family members who had contributed to the strategic development of this final pressure campaign. The threat to disown me was accompanied by detailed descriptions of how my behavior was destroying family relationships and causing emotional distress that was affecting my mother's health and creating anxiety for my siblings who were witnessing the dissolution of family unity. The implication was that I bore sole responsibility for family conflict that could be immediately resolved through resumption of my previous financial support patterns. The psychological manipulation embedded within this conversation included references to immigrant family values, parental sacrifices for my education, and cultural expectations about successful children supporting their parents during their senior years. These appeals were designed to trigger guilt and shame that would override rational evaluation of the exploitative dynamics that had necessitated my boundary-setting efforts. The ultimatum that concluded this conversation demanded immediate response to a new financial crisis that required $25,000 for medical expenses that my parents claimed insurance would not cover. The urgency of this request was emphasized through statements about scheduled procedures that could not be delayed and consequences for my mother's health if treatment was postponed due to insufficient funds. The timing of this ultimatum, occurring simultaneously with the disownment threat, represented sophisticated psychological pressure designed to force immediate compliance through fear of permanent family estrangement combined with guilt about potentially contributing to my mother's medical problems. The strategy assumed that emotional manipulation would overcome months of boundary-setting work and therapeutic progress. The therapeutic session I scheduled for that same afternoon provided essential support for processing this escalation while maintaining perspective about the manipulation tactics being employed. Dr. Mitchell helped me recognize that the intensity of pressure I was experiencing actually validated the necessity of the boundaries I had established while demonstrating how thoroughly my family had internalized assumptions about their entitlement to my financial resources. The analysis of this ultimatum revealed multiple inconsistencies that suggested fabrication or exaggeration of the medical crisis being used to justify the financial demand. The timeline for required treatment did not align with typical medical procedures, the insurance coverage claims contradicted my understanding of my parents' policy benefits, and the specific dollar amount matched previous financial requests that had been unrelated to medical needs. The decision to request documentation of the claimed medical expenses and insurance denials represented a significant departure from my historical pattern of immediate compliance with family financial requests. This requirement for verification triggered additional accusations of distrust and selfishness that revealed how thoroughly my family expected unquestioned acceptance of their financial claims without accountability or transparency. The resistance I encountered when requesting basic documentation for a $25,000 expense confirmed my suspicions about the authenticity of this crisis while demonstrating the extent to which my family had become accustomed to my automatic financial compliance without oversight or conditions. Their inability to provide verification suggested that the urgency was manufactured to overcome my recently established evaluation procedures. The support group session that week provided crucial perspective from other members who had experienced similar escalation tactics when their own families encountered sustained resistance to financial exploitation. The shared experiences reinforced that ultimatums and disownment threats were common responses to boundary setting that typically represented desperate attempts to restore previous power dynamics rather than genuine consequences for disappointing behavior. One group member described how her family's threats to cut contact had eventually been revealed as empty manipulation when they realized that isolation would eliminate their access to her financial resources entirely. The threatened consequences had never materialized because the family needed her support more than she needed their approval, creating leverage that had ultimately resulted in more respectful relationship dynamics. Another member shared his experience of calling his family's bluff when they threatened permanent estrangement if he refused to fund his brother's business venture. The temporary loss of contact had been painful but ultimately beneficial, as it forced his family to recognize that their relationships were based on financial utility rather than genuine affection and had motivated them to develop more authentic connection patterns. The workplace environment continued to provide stability and validation during this period of family crisis that threatened to undermine my confidence in boundary-setting decisions. The professional recognition I received for technical leadership and project management success reinforced my competence and value outside of family dynamics that had become increasingly toxic and destructive. The Employee Assistance Program counselor helped me develop communication strategies for responding to family ultimatums that maintained my boundaries while avoiding escalation of conflict that could result in permanent relationship damage. The recommended approach involved acknowledging the family's concerns while declining to accept responsibility for their emotional reactions to my reasonable financial policies. The home purchase process that I continued despite family pressure represented concrete progress toward personal goals that validated my decision to prioritize my own well-being over family demands that would prevent me from achieving financial independence and security. The mortgage approval process required demonstration of stable finances that would be jeopardized by continued large family financial gifts that depleted my resources without building my own equity. The real estate agent who was assisting with my home search provided unexpected perspective about family financial dynamics when she shared her own experience of setting boundaries with relatives who had expected unlimited access to her commission income. Her professional success had attracted family members who viewed her earnings as available for their various needs and wants rather than as personal income that required careful management for long-term security. The inspection process for the house I selected revealed the satisfaction of making major life decisions based on my own preferences and priorities rather than other people's expectations or needs that had dominated my choice-making for decades. The selection of neighborhood, architectural features, and interior layouts represented authentic expressions of my personal taste and lifestyle goals rather than strategic decisions designed to maximize my capacity to support family members. The family's reaction to my proceeding with home purchase, despite their ultimatum, revealed their assumption that financial pressure would force me to abandon personal goals in favor of their immediate needs. Their surprise at my continued commitment to the purchase process indicated their miscalculation about my resolve and their underestimation of the boundary-setting work I had been conducting through therapy. The closing date that was scheduled for the following month provided a concrete timeline for major life change that would symbolically and practically represent my transition from family financial safety net to independent adult who maintained appropriate but limited family financial relationships. The mortgage commitment created legal obligation that would prevent future large family financial gifts without jeopardizing my own housing security. The family conference call that was arranged to address my betrayal of family values provided additional evidence of their coordinated manipulation campaign while revealing the extent of their entitlement attitudes about my financial resources. The conversation included multiple relatives who expressed disappointment about my changed approach to family financial assistance while offering no acknowledgement of the exploitation that had necessitated my boundary setting. The emotional toll of maintaining boundaries despite sustained family pressure required additional therapeutic support as stress-related symptoms including anxiety, insomnia, and digestive problems intensified during this period of escalated conflict. The physical manifestations of relationship stress validated the necessity of boundary setting while highlighting the serious health consequences of continued exposure to family manipulation. The medical evaluation that was recommended by my therapist confirmed that chronic stress from family conflict was contributing to physical symptoms that could develop into more serious health problems if the relationship dynamics were not modified. The physician's recommendation to minimize exposure to stressful family interactions provided professional validation for limiting contact that had been primarily motivated by emotional self-protection. The realization that crystallized during this breaking point period was that my family's escalation tactics revealed their view of me as a financial resource rather than a complete person whose emotional well-being and personal goals deserved consideration and respect. The intensity of their pressure when I established reasonable boundaries demonstrated that their primary concern was maintaining access to my money rather than preserving genuine family relationships. The choice that became clear through this crisis was between continued exploitation that would prevent me from achieving personal goals while enabling family dysfunction, or boundary maintenance that might result in temporary estrangement but would create opportunity for authentic relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial utility. The path forward required courage to accept potential loss of family connection in service of personal integrity and long-term well-being. The 48 hours following my father's disownment threat represented the most critical decision point of my adult life, as I weighed the potential loss of family relationships against the preservation of personal integrity and financial security. The ultimatum had created artificial urgency designed to prevent careful consideration of consequences, but the therapeutic work I had completed provided foundation for measured evaluation rather than emotion-driven compliance with unreasonable demands. The sleepless nights that accompanied this decision period were filled with mental rehearsal of potential outcomes and their long-term implications for my personal development and family relationships. The choice was not simply about whether to provide $25,000 for questionable medical expenses, but about establishing fundamental principles that would govern my relationships and personal autonomy for the remainder of my life. Dr. Mitchell's emergency consultation session provided crucial support for processing the psychological pressure while maintaining clarity about the manipulation tactics being employed to force immediate compliance. The therapeutic exploration revealed that disownment threats typically represented desperate attempts to restore power dynamics rather than genuine intentions to permanently sever family relationships that provided practical benefits to the threatening parties. The analysis of my family's behavior patterns throughout our relationship history demonstrated consistent escalation when initial manipulation tactics proved ineffective, followed by eventual acceptance of modified relationship terms once they recognized that pressure would not achieve desired outcomes. This pattern suggested that maintaining boundaries despite current threats would ultimately result in more respectful interaction patterns rather than permanent estrangement. The decision-making framework that emerged from this therapeutic consultation emphasized prioritizing long-term relationship health over short-term conflict avoidance while maintaining commitment to personal goals and values that supported authentic self-expression. The choice to maintain boundaries despite family pressure represented investment in my own well-being that could ultimately benefit family relationships by eliminating exploitation patterns that prevented genuine emotional connection. The support group session that occurred during this critical decision period provided additional perspective from members who had navigated similar ultimatums while maintaining commitment to healthy relationship boundaries. The shared experiences reinforced that family threats often represented attempts to restore previous power dynamics rather than authentic consequences for reasonable behavior modifications. One group member described how her family's threats of permanent estrangement had gradually diminished when they realized that isolation would eliminate their access to her professional network and financial resources entirely. The threatened consequences had never fully materialized because the family required her support more than she needed their approval, creating leverage that had eventually resulted in more balanced relationship dynamics. Another member shared his experience of accepting temporary family estrangement as necessary consequence of establishing financial boundaries that protected his retirement security while preventing continued enabling of relatives' irresponsible financial behavior. The period of reduced contact had been emotionally difficult but ultimately beneficial for everyone involved, as it forced family members to develop personal responsibility while preserving his resources for genuine emergencies. The workplace environment continued to provide stability and validation during this period of family crisis that tested my confidence in boundary-setting decisions. The professional recognition I received for technical expertise and leadership capabilities reinforced my competence and value in relationships that operated according to principles of mutual respect and reciprocal benefit rather than one-sided exploitation. The Employee Assistance Program counselor provided practical guidance for communicating my decision to family members in ways that maintained dignity while clearly establishing consequences for continued manipulation attempts. The recommended approach emphasized acknowledging their emotional reactions while declining responsibility for managing their responses to reasonable boundary enforcement. The drafting of a formal response to my father's ultimatum required careful consideration of language that would communicate my position clearly while avoiding escalation that could result in permanent relationship damage. The message needed to demonstrate respect for their concerns while establishing firm boundaries around financial assistance that would protect my resources and personal goals. The final communication that I sent to my family addressed their ultimatum directly while explaining my position regarding financial assistance and relationship boundaries. The message acknowledged their expressed concerns about family unity, while clarifying that genuine family relationships required mutual respect and consideration rather than one-sided financial obligation that prevented individual goal achievement. The response outlined specific conditions under which I would consider future financial assistance, including requirements for documentation of claimed needs, transparency about how funds would be utilized, acknowledgement of my personal financial goals, and respect for my decision-making autonomy regarding resource allocation. These conditions represented reasonable expectations for adult family relationships based on equality rather than exploitation. The family's reaction to this communication revealed the extent of their entitlement attitudes while demonstrating their fundamental misunderstanding of appropriate relationship boundaries. The immediate response included accusations of selfishness and cultural betrayal that ignored the reasonable nature of my proposed conditions while attempting to reframe basic accountability requirements as evidence of distrust and disrespect. The coordinated nature of family responses suggested continued consultation among relatives who were developing strategies for overcoming my resistance rather than accepting the modified relationship terms I had proposed. The consistency of messaging across multiple family members indicated planning and preparation that reinforced the manipulative rather than spontaneous nature of their pressure campaign. The home purchase closing that occurred during this period of family conflict represented concrete progress toward personal goals despite sustained pressure to abandon individual priorities in favor of family financial demands. The mortgage commitment created legal obligation that prevented future large family financial gifts while symbolizing my transition from family financial safety net to independent adult with appropriate but limited family financial relationships. The moving process that followed home purchase provided therapeutic benefits through focus on personal preferences and lifestyle goals rather than other people's needs and expectations that had dominated my decision-making for decades. The selection of furniture, decoration schemes, and organizational systems represented authentic choices about how I wanted to live rather than strategic decisions designed to maximize my capacity to support family members. The physical separation that resulted from home ownership created psychological distance that supported boundary maintenance while reducing exposure to daily family pressure that had been transmitted through frequent phone calls and unexpected visits to my apartment. The new address provided sanctuary where I could process relationship changes without constant external pressure to resume previous exploitation patterns. The family's response to my home purchase announcement included expressions of disappointment about my priorities while revealing their expectation that major life decisions should be coordinated with their needs and preferences rather than made independently according to my personal goals and financial planning. Their inability to celebrate this achievement demonstrated how thoroughly they viewed my resources as available for their utilization. The realization that emerged from this critical decision period was that choosing personal integrity over family approval represented necessary investment in long-term relationship health rather than selfish abandonment of cultural values. The temporary conflict that resulted from boundary enforcement would ultimately create opportunity for authentic family connections based on mutual respect rather than financial exploitation. The courage required to maintain boundaries despite disownment threats was greater than I had anticipated, but the alternative of continued financial exploitation seemed far more dangerous than temporary family estrangement that might motivate recognition of my autonomy and personal worth. The decision to prioritize my own well-being represented fundamental transformation in my understanding of healthy relationships and personal responsibility. The support network that I had developed through therapy and support group participation provided essential encouragement for maintaining commitment to boundary enforcement despite emotional pressure and guilt that accompanied family conflict. The validation from mental health professionals and peers who had navigated similar challenges reinforced that my decision was reasonable and necessary rather than selfish or culturally inappropriate. The physical and emotional relief that followed my decision to maintain boundaries despite family threats validated the psychological toll that exploitation patterns had been creating throughout years of automatic compliance with unreasonable financial demands. The reduction in stress-related symptoms, including headaches, insomnia, and digestive problems, provided immediate evidence that boundary enforcement supported my overall health and well-being. The long-term perspective that guided this decision emphasized building sustainable relationships that could continue throughout my lifetime rather than maintaining patterns that would eventually result in my financial depletion and family resentment when resources were no longer available. The choice to establish boundaries represented investment in everyone's long-term interests rather than immediate gratification that served no one's authentic needs. The transformation that was occurring through this boundary-setting process extended beyond family relationships to encompass my entire approach to personal autonomy and authentic self-expression. The courage to choose personal integrity over external approval was creating foundation for more genuine relationships across all areas of my life while building confidence in my ability to navigate difficult decisions according to my values rather than other people's expectations. The 3 weeks that followed my formal response to the family ultimatum were marked by complete silence from relatives who had previously maintained constant communication through daily phone calls, text messages, and unexpected visits. This sudden absence of contact represented a dramatic shift from the escalating pressure campaign that had dominated my life for months, creating an unexpected sense of peace that I had not experienced since the BMW incident first exposed the exploitation patterns underlying our family relationships. The silence was not merely the absence of communication, but rather a calculated response designed to demonstrate the consequences of my boundary enforcement while creating psychological pressure through social isolation. The coordinated nature of this communication cessation across multiple family members indicated strategic planning rather than spontaneous emotional reaction, revealing the sophisticated manipulation tactics that had been operating beneath the surface of apparently loving family relationships. The initial days of this communication blackout were filled with anxiety and doubt as I questioned whether my decision to maintain boundaries had been worth the apparent cost of family estrangement. The absence of familiar voices and regular check-ins created a void that was filled with second-guessing and concerns about whether I had made irreversible damage to relationships that had provided identity and belonging throughout my adult life. Professional therapy provided essential support during this period of family silence that tested my resolve while revealing the psychological dependency I had developed on family approval and constant contact. Dr. Mitchell helped me recognize that the discomfort I experienced during this communication cessation actually demonstrated how thoroughly my emotional well-being had become dependent on external validation from people who had been exploiting my generosity. The therapeutic exploration revealed that healthy relationships could withstand temporary conflict and boundary establishment without requiring permanent estrangement or punishment through withdrawal of communication. The family's inability to engage in constructive dialogue about relationship modifications indicated fundamental problems with conflict resolution and mutual respect that extended far beyond the immediate financial disagreements. The support group sessions during this period provided valuable perspective from members who had experienced similar communication blackouts when their families encountered sustained resistance to manipulation tactics. The shared experiences reinforced that silent treatment was a common response to boundary enforcement that typically represented temporary strategy rather than permanent estrangement, particularly when the boundary setter provided resources that the family valued. One group member described how her family's 3-month communication silence had eventually ended when they encountered a genuine financial emergency that required her professional expertise and connections. The crisis had forced them to acknowledge that their punishment strategy was counterproductive to their own interests while demonstrating that her boundaries were not negotiable through emotional manipulation. Another member shared his experience of family communication cessation that had lasted nearly 6 months before relatives began reaching out individually to rebuild relationships on more respectful terms. The extended silence had been emotionally difficult but ultimately beneficial, as it forced family members to recognize their dependency on his emotional support and practical assistance while motivating them to develop more mature relationship patterns. The workplace environment continued to provide stability and validation during this period of family silence that could have undermined my confidence in personal relationships. The professional recognition I received for technical leadership and collaborative problem-solving reinforced my competence in building positive relationships based on mutual respect and shared goals rather than exploitation and manipulation. The Employee Assistance Program counselor helped me develop perspective about the family communication blackout, while maintaining focus on personal goals and professional development that supported long-term well-being. The counselor emphasized that healthy individuals could maintain emotional stability despite temporary loss of family contact when those relationships had been based on conditional acceptance rather than genuine appreciation. The home ownership experience that continued during this period of family silence provided concrete evidence of my capacity for independent decision-making and personal goal achievement without family approval or involvement. The process of establishing utility services, selecting insurance coverage, and coordinating maintenance tasks demonstrated practical competence that had been overshadowed by years of focus on family problem-solving and financial assistance. The neighborhood integration process that followed home purchase created opportunities for building new social connections based on shared interests and geographic proximity rather than family obligation or cultural expectations. The relationships with neighbors developed naturally through common concerns about property maintenance, community safety, and local development rather than histories of financial dependency or emotional manipulation. The volunteer activities that I initiated during this period of increased personal time provided meaningful outlets for helping others while maintaining appropriate boundaries that protected my resources and emotional well-being. The structured nature of volunteer organizations created clear expectations about time commitment and resource allocation that contrasted sharply with the unlimited family obligations that had previously consumed my discretionary energy. The financial planning activities that I pursued during this communication silence period resulted in accelerated progress toward retirement savings and investment goals that had been delayed by years of family financial assistance. The absence of regular requests for emergency funding allowed me to maximize contributions to retirement accounts while building emergency reserves that would provide security during economic uncertainty. The investment advisor who worked with me during this period emphasized that consistent savings and investment patterns would create compound returns that would ultimately enable more substantial family assistance in the future than the irregular large gifts that had been depleting my resources without building long-term security. This perspective reinforced that boundary enforcement served everyone's interests by preserving my capacity for sustainable generosity. The stress reduction that accompanied the family communication silence was measurable through improvements in sleep quality, digestive function, and overall energy levels that had been compromised during months of sustained pressure and emotional manipulation. The physical relief validated the psychological toll that exploitation patterns had been creating while demonstrating the health benefits of boundary enforcement. The medical follow-up appointment that occurred during this period confirmed significant improvement in stress-related symptoms that had been affecting my work performance and quality of life. The physician noted decreased blood pressure, improved sleep patterns, and reduced anxiety symptoms that correlated with my reports of reduced family conflict and pressure. The professional development activities that I pursued during this period of increased personal focus resulted in skill advancement and industry recognition that enhanced my career prospects while providing intellectual stimulation that had been lacking during years of preoccupation with family financial problems. The ability to concentrate on professional growth without constant family distractions created momentum that supported long-term career objectives. The social activities that I resumed during this period of family silence included reconnecting with friends and colleagues who had been neglected during years of family crisis management and financial assistance provision. The renewed relationships provided perspective about healthy social dynamics based on mutual interest and reciprocal support rather than one-sided obligation and resource extraction. The personal hobbies and interests that I rediscovered during this period of increased autonomy included creative pursuits and physical activities that had been abandoned during years of focus on family needs and professional advancement. The return to activities that provided personal satisfaction without external obligation created psychological balance that had been missing from my life for extended periods. The realization that emerged during this period of family silence was that the communication cessation had created space for personal development and authentic relationship building that had been impossible while managing constant family demands and manipulation. The absence of family pressure allowed me to reconnect with personal interests and goals that had been subordinated to other people's needs for too long. The growing confidence that developed during this period of independent living and decision-making reinforced my capacity for building satisfying life without unlimited family involvement or approval. The practical competence I demonstrated in home ownership, professional advancement, and community engagement validated my ability to maintain well-being despite temporary loss of family connection. The perspective that crystallized during these weeks of silence was that genuine family relationships should enhance rather than diminish individual well-being and personal development. The relief I experienced during the communication blackout revealed how thoroughly family relationships had been contributing to stress and limitation rather than support and encouragement. The decision to maintain boundary enforcement despite family silence represented commitment to long-term relationship health rather than short-term conflict avoidance. The temporary loss of family communication was creating opportunity for relationship reconstruction based on mutual respect and appropriate boundaries rather than exploitation patterns that served no one's authentic interests. The breakdown of my family's communication blackout began with a seemingly innocent text message from Isabella on a Tuesday evening in late January, exactly 23 days after the coordinated silence had commenced. The message appeared casual in its inquiry about my well-being, while carefully avoiding direct reference to the financial conflict that had precipitated the family estrangement. The timing and tone suggested strategic calculation rather than spontaneous concern, indicating that the family's unified approach was beginning to fracture under the pressure of sustained boundary enforcement. Isabella's message included subtle references to family concerns about my isolation and suggestions that everyone missed our previous communication patterns while deliberately omitting any acknowledgement of the manipulation tactics that had necessitated my boundary establishment. The carefully neutral language indicated coordination with other family members who had likely approved this initial contact attempt, while maintaining their own communication silence as leverage for future negotiations. The psychological analysis I conducted with Dr. Mitchell regarding this initial contact revealed typical patterns associated with family manipulation campaigns that encounter sustained resistance. The selection of Isabella as the initial contact person reflected strategic thinking about which family member might generate the least defensive response while opening communication channels that could subsequently be exploited by others who had been more directly involved in the financial exploitation. The therapeutic exploration emphasized that responding to this contact attempt required careful consideration of my communication goals and boundary maintenance, rather than emotional relief at family reconnection that might undermine months of progress toward healthier relationship dynamics. The decision about whether and how to respond would establish precedents for future family interactions while demonstrating my commitment to modified relationship terms. The support group session that occurred during this period provided valuable perspective from members who had navigated similar family contact attempts following extended communication blackouts. The shared experiences reinforced that initial family outreach typically represented testing behavior designed to assess whether boundary enforcement had weakened sufficiently to allow resumed exploitation rather than genuine acknowledgement of relationship problems. One group member described how her family's initial contact through a sympathetic relative had been followed by escalating requests for assistance once communication channels were reopened, demonstrating that the underlying exploitation patterns had not been modified despite the temporary silence. Her experience emphasized the importance of maintaining consistent boundaries regardless of which family member initiated renewed contact. Another member shared his strategy of responding to family contact attempts with clear communication about relationship terms while avoiding emotional engagement that might be interpreted as willingness to resume previous dynamics. His approach had eventually resulted in more respectful family relationships while preventing manipulation tactics from regaining effectiveness through gradual boundary erosion. The response that I crafted to Isabella's message required careful consideration of language that would acknowledge her outreach while maintaining the boundary framework I had established through months of therapeutic work and practical implementation. The communication needed to demonstrate availability for genuine relationship building, while clearly indicating that financial exploitation and manipulation tactics would not be tolerated regardless of which family member employed them. The message I ultimately sent acknowledged Isabella's concern while explaining that my well-being had actually improved significantly during the period of reduced family contact due to elimination of stress associated with financial pressure and emotional manipulation. The response included clear statements about my continued love for family members combined with firm boundaries around financial assistance and respectful communication that would govern future interactions. The immediate reaction to my response revealed additional information about family dynamics and strategic planning that had been occurring during the communication blackout period. Isabella's follow-up messages included expressions of surprise about my positive description of the separation period, combined with attempts to minimize the significance of previous financial conflicts while suggesting that everyone had learned from recent difficulties. The minimization tactics embedded within these communications included characterizations of the BMW incident as a misunderstanding rather than deliberate deception, references to family financial stress that justified their resource allocation decisions, and suggestions that my boundary enforcement had been disproportionate to the actual harm caused by their actions. These attempts to reframe the narrative indicated ongoing failure to acknowledge the legitimate grievances that had motivated my boundary establishment. The family meeting that Isabella proposed as a mechanism for addressing relationship concerns represented an opportunity for direct communication about boundary maintenance while testing their willingness to engage in genuine problem-solving rather than continued manipulation tactics. The decision to participate in this meeting required careful preparation about communication goals and consequence enforcement, while maintaining realistic expectations about potential outcomes. The therapeutic preparation for this family meeting included role-playing exercises that helped me practice maintaining boundaries despite emotional pressure, while communicating my position clearly without becoming defensive or accusatory. Dr. Mitchell emphasized that the meeting's success should be measured by my ability to maintain consistent boundaries rather than by family acceptance of modified relationship terms. The meeting location that was selected represented neutral territory that would prevent home field advantage for either party, while providing public setting that might discourage extreme emotional manipulation tactics. The restaurant environment would limit conversation duration while offering natural exit opportunities if the discussion became unproductive or exploitative. The family members who attended this meeting included my parents, Isabella, and Marcus, creating a coalition that would test my resolve while potentially revealing different perspectives about relationship modification and boundary acceptance. The group dynamics would provide valuable information about family hierarchy and decision-making patterns while demonstrating their collective commitment to genuine relationship improvement. The opening statements that each family member presented revealed significant differences in their understanding of recent events and willingness to acknowledge problematic behaviors. My parents' contributions focused primarily on expressing hurt about the communication separation while avoiding accountability for the financial exploitation that had precipitated the boundary enforcement. Marcus's participation demonstrated continued failure to recognize the BMW incident as violation of trust while expressing confusion about why financial assistance had become complicated by requirements for documentation and transparency. His perspective revealed how thoroughly he had internalized assumptions about unlimited access to my resources without reciprocal obligation or appreciation. Isabella's role as meeting facilitator included attempts to find compromise solutions that would restore family harmony without requiring fundamental changes in the exploitation patterns that had created the current crisis. Her proposals consistently involved minor modifications in communication style rather than substantive acknowledgement of financial boundary violations. The resistance I encountered when explaining my boundary framework revealed the extent of family entitlement attitudes, while demonstrating their fundamental misunderstanding of appropriate adult relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided obligation. The inability to accept basic requirements for financial transparency and decision-making consultation indicated that genuine relationship modification would require sustained pressure rather than single conversation. The emotional manipulation tactics that emerged during this meeting included references to my parents' advancing age and health concerns, suggestions that my boundary enforcement was damaging family unity, and implications that my success had created obligations that transcended personal preferences about resource allocation. These attempts to trigger guilt and compliance demonstrated that underlying manipulation patterns remained unchanged despite the temporary communication separation. The meeting conclusion that I initiated after 2 hours of circular discussion established clear consequences for continued manipulation attempts while expressing continued love for family members who were willing to engage in respectful relationship building. The communication standards I articulated included requirements for honest conversation, financial transparency, and acknowledgement of my autonomy that would govern future interactions. The immediate aftermath of this family meeting revealed mixed reactions that indicated partial success in communicating my position while highlighting continued resistance to fundamental relationship modification. Some family members expressed willingness to consider modified interaction patterns, while others demonstrated ongoing commitment to manipulation tactics that would require additional boundary enforcement. The realization that emerged from this initial family contact was that genuine relationship healing would require extended time and consistent boundary maintenance rather than single conversation that resolved all accumulated problems. The family's partial acknowledgement of relationship difficulties represented progress, while their continued minimization tactics indicated substantial additional work would be necessary to achieve respectful relationship dynamics. The weeks following the family meeting demonstrated a gradual shift in dynamics as my relatives began testing the boundaries I had established while slowly adapting their communication patterns to accommodate the requirements I had outlined. This adjustment period revealed the extent to which previous family interactions had been based on my automatic compliance with requests rather than genuine consultation and mutual respect that characterized healthy adult relationships. The modified communication patterns that emerged included more formal notification of family events rather than assumptions about my participation, acknowledgement of my professional commitments when scheduling family activities, and recognition of my personal goals as legitimate considerations rather than obstacles to family resource allocation. These changes represented significant progress while highlighting how thoroughly previous interactions had failed to respect my autonomy and individual priorities. My parents' attempts to rebuild the relationship demonstrated varying degrees of understanding regarding the boundary violations that had necessitated the communication separation. My mother's approach included increased expressions of appreciation for my professional achievements and personal accomplishments while gradually reducing references to family financial needs that might be interpreted as indirect requests for assistance. My father's adjustment to the modified relationship dynamic proved more challenging, as his communication style had been heavily dependent on assumptions about my availability for problem-solving and resource provision. The requirement for direct requests rather than implied expectations created awkwardness in conversations while forcing acknowledgement of the assistance he had been receiving without explicit recognition or appreciation. Marcus's response to the boundary framework revealed continued difficulty accepting accountability for the BMW incident, while gradually demonstrating recognition that future financial assistance would require transparency and consultation rather than unilateral family decisions about resource allocation. His progress remained limited, but indicated potential for eventual relationship improvement if boundary enforcement continued consistently. Isabella's role during this adjustment period involved attempting to facilitate improved family communication, while gradually recognizing that her previous mediation efforts had often involved pressure for me to compromise my boundaries rather than encouraging family members to modify their exploitative behaviors. This recognition represented significant progress in her understanding of healthy relationship dynamics. The professional therapy that continued during this adjustment period provided essential support for maintaining boundary consistency while navigating the emotional complexity of gradual family reconciliation. Dr. Mitchell emphasized that sustainable relationship improvement required extended time for new patterns to become established rather than immediate return to previous interaction levels that might enable renewed exploitation. The therapeutic exploration revealed that my growing confidence in boundary maintenance was creating foundation for more authentic self-expression across all relationship contexts rather than limiting benefits to family interactions alone. The skills developed through family boundary enforcement were transferring to professional relationships, friendships, and romantic connections where similar patterns of people-pleasing and conflict avoidance had previously created vulnerability to exploitation. The workplace environment during this period reflected my increased confidence in advocating for appropriate recognition and advancement opportunities, rather than accepting unlimited additional responsibilities without corresponding compensation or acknowledgement. The boundary-setting skills developed through family conflict were proving valuable for professional development and career advancement that honored my contributions while maintaining sustainable work-life balance. The employee resource group for professional women that I joined during this period provided additional perspective about boundary setting in career contexts while building relationships with colleagues who valued assertiveness and goal-oriented behavior rather than unlimited availability and self-sacrifice. These professional relationships reinforced that healthy interactions were based on mutual respect rather than one-sided accommodation. The home ownership experience continued to provide concrete evidence of my capacity for independent decision-making while creating physical space that supported emotional boundaries around family involvement in personal matters. The process of establishing household routines, maintenance schedules, and entertainment preferences represented authentic choices about lifestyle and priorities rather than decisions influenced by family expectations or approval-seeking behaviors. The neighborhood relationships that developed during this period operated according to principles of reciprocal assistance and shared community interests, rather than one-sided resource provision that had characterized family dynamics. The mutual support that emerged through participation in neighborhood association activities and community improvement projects demonstrated healthy models for giving and receiving help within appropriate boundaries. The volunteer activities that I expanded during this period of increased personal focus provided opportunities for meaningful contribution while maintaining clear limits around time commitment and resource allocation. The structured nature of nonprofit organizations created frameworks for assistance that prevented exploitation while maximizing positive impact through strategic resource deployment rather than unlimited availability. The financial planning progress that accelerated during this boundary-setting period resulted in achievement of savings goals that had been delayed by years of family financial assistance. The investment portfolio growth that occurred through consistent contributions rather than irregular large withdrawals provided foundation for long-term security, while creating capacity for sustainable family assistance when genuine emergencies arose. The investment advisor consultations that occurred during this period reinforced that boundary setting around family financial assistance had improved rather than damaged my capacity for meaningful support by preserving resources that could be deployed strategically rather than depleted through misallocation to non-essential purchases like luxury vehicles. The professional guidance validated that appropriate boundaries served everyone's long-term interests. The stress management techniques that I implemented during this adjustment period included regular exercise routines, meditation practices, and recreational activities that provided emotional regulation support while building resilience for continued boundary maintenance despite periodic family pressure. The self-care practices represented investment in sustained well-being rather than temporary stress relief that might compromise boundary consistency. The medical follow-up appointments during this period documented continued improvement in stress-related symptoms including normalized blood pressure, improved sleep quality, and enhanced digestive function that correlated with reduced family conflict and manipulation exposure. The health benefits provided additional motivation for maintaining boundary enforcement despite emotional difficulty of modified family relationships. The social activities that I resumed during this period included reconnection with friends and colleagues who had been neglected during years of family crisis management and financial assistance provision. The renewed relationships demonstrated that healthy social connections could coexist with family boundaries while providing alternative sources of emotional support and meaningful interaction. The romantic relationship that I began developing during this period benefited significantly from the boundary-setting skills and self-advocacy capabilities that had emerged through family conflict resolution. The dating experience revealed that previous relationship patterns had been influenced by people-pleasing tendencies that made me vulnerable to partners who might exploit my generosity and conflict avoidance rather than appreciating my authentic personality and individual goals. The personal interests and hobbies that I rediscovered during this period of increased autonomy included creative pursuits, physical activities, and intellectual challenges that had been abandoned during years of focus on family needs and professional advancement. The return to activities that provided personal satisfaction without external obligation created psychological balance that supported sustained well-being and authentic self-expression. The professional development opportunities that I pursued during this period included skill-building workshops, industry conferences, and leadership training programs that enhanced career prospects while providing intellectual stimulation and professional networking that had been lacking during years of preoccupation with family financial problems and crisis management. The realization that crystallized during this adjustment period was that trust in my own judgment had been systematically undermined through years of family pressure to prioritize other people's immediate needs over my long-term well-being and personal goals. The boundary-setting process had restored confidence in my decision-making capabilities while demonstrating that self-advocacy was essential for building relationships based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. The growing recognition that my previous patterns of unlimited family assistance had been preventing everyone from developing personal responsibility and genuine independence provided motivation for continued boundary maintenance despite periodic guilt and pressure to resume previous dynamics. The understanding that healthy relationships required individual autonomy and mutual respect created foundation for sustainable family connections that could continue throughout my lifetime. The perspective that emerged from this period of sustained boundary enforcement was that genuine love and care were demonstrated through encouragement of personal growth and respect for individual goals rather than pressure to sacrifice authentic self-expression for other people's immediate comfort or convenience. The modified family relationships that were developing represented progress toward connections based on appreciation rather than utility, while honoring both cultural values and individual autonomy. The shift in family dynamics took an unexpected turn when my father experienced a mild heart attack during the first week of March, creating a genuine medical emergency that would test my boundary framework while revealing surprising sources of family support and resistance. The hospital call came from Isabella at 6 in the morning, her voice strained with anxiety as she explained that our father had been admitted overnight with chest pains that required immediate cardiac intervention. The drive to Northwestern Memorial Hospital provided time for careful consideration of how to respond to this crisis within the boundary framework I had established, while acknowledging the legitimate nature of the emergency and my genuine concern for my father's well-being. The therapeutic work I had completed provided foundation for distinguishing between authentic medical needs and manufactured crises designed to manipulate financial assistance. The cardiac unit waiting room where our family gathered revealed immediate tensions regarding my presence and participation in medical decision-making despite months of modified family relationships. Marcus's reaction to my arrival included visible discomfort and whispered conversations with my mother that suggested continued resentment about boundary enforcement that had disrupted their expectations about family financial assistance availability. My mother's response to the medical crisis demonstrated both genuine distress about my father's condition and calculated awareness of how the emergency might provide opportunity for renewed financial requests that could be justified through medical necessity rather than discretionary spending. Her comments about insurance coverage limitations and potential treatment costs indicated strategic thinking about resource needs rather than exclusive focus on medical outcomes. The medical consultation with the attending cardiologist provided factual information about my father's condition while establishing realistic expectations about treatment options, recovery timeline, and associated costs that would be covered through existing insurance benefits. The physician's explanation indicated that while the situation was serious, it did not represent life-threatening emergency requiring extraordinary financial intervention. Isabella's behavior during this medical crisis revealed unexpected maturity and insight regarding family dynamics that had not been apparent during previous interactions. Her private conversation with me in the hospital cafeteria included acknowledgement of the manipulation tactics that other family members had employed while expressing genuine appreciation for the boundary setting that had forced everyone to develop more personal responsibility. The revelation that Isabella had been observing family exploitation patterns for years without feeling capable of addressing them directly provided new perspective about alliance possibilities within the family structure. Her admission that she had been uncomfortable with the BMW incident but had felt pressured to maintain family unity rather than supporting my legitimate grievances demonstrated her emerging willingness to advocate for healthy relationship dynamics. Isabella's decision to serve as informal family spokesperson during the medical crisis included filtering communication between family members while preventing manipulation attempts that might exploit the emotional vulnerability created by medical emergency. Her intervention proved crucial for maintaining focus on medical needs rather than allowing the crisis to become vehicle for renewed financial pressure. The medical insurance consultation that occurred during my father's hospitalization confirmed that existing coverage would address the majority of treatment costs while identifying specific areas where family financial assistance might be genuinely needed. The documented financial requirements provided clear framework for evaluating assistance requests based on actual medical necessity rather than manufactured urgency. The family financial planning meeting that Isabella organized during my father's recovery period represented the first collaborative discussion of resource allocation that included transparency about insurance coverage, medical expenses, and realistic assessment of family financial capacity. The structured approach prevented emotional manipulation while ensuring that genuine needs were addressed through appropriate resource deployment. Marcus's participation in this financial planning process revealed grudging recognition that previous resource allocation decisions had been made without adequate consideration of long-term consequences or respect for my financial autonomy. His acknowledgement of the BMW incident as poor judgment rather than legitimate family resource utilization represented significant progress in understanding healthy financial relationships. My mother's contribution to the financial planning discussion included detailed documentation of insurance benefits and medical expenses that demonstrated genuine transparency rather than vague references to financial stress that had characterized previous assistance requests. The factual approach provided foundation for informed decision-making about appropriate family financial support. The assistance plan that emerged from this collaborative discussion included specific contributions from multiple family members, rather than automatic assumption that I would bear primary financial responsibility for medical expenses. The shared resource allocation created more equitable distribution of family financial obligations while acknowledging my capacity for larger contributions without exploiting my generosity. The recovery period during which my father remained hospitalized provided opportunity for extended family conversations that addressed relationship patterns and communication improvements that could support long-term healing beyond the immediate medical crisis. The serious nature of the health emergency created motivation for authentic relationship evaluation rather than continued avoidance of underlying problems. My father's personal reflection during his recovery included acknowledgement of the stress that family financial conflicts had been creating for everyone involved, while expressing genuine appreciation for my professional success and personal achievements that extended beyond my capacity for family financial assistance. The medical crisis had provided perspective about relationship priorities that transcended financial considerations. The therapeutic session that I scheduled during this family medical crisis provided essential support for navigating the complex emotions associated with genuine family emergency, while maintaining commitment to boundary framework that protected my long-term well-being. Dr. Mitchell emphasized that appropriate response to legitimate crisis could coexist with continued boundary enforcement around exploitation patterns. The distinction between genuine emergency assistance and manipulation opportunity became clearer through careful evaluation of the medical situation and family financial capacity that revealed realistic resource needs rather than manufactured urgency designed to overwhelm boundary-setting resistance. The systematic approach prevented emotional decision-making that might undermine months of progress toward healthier relationship dynamics. The support group session that occurred during this period provided valuable perspective from members who had navigated similar family medical emergencies while maintaining financial boundaries that protected their resources for sustainable assistance rather than unlimited availability that enabled continued exploitation. The shared experiences reinforced that appropriate crisis response could strengthen rather than weaken boundary enforcement. The workplace flexibility that my employer provided during this family medical emergency demonstrated the professional relationships and resource availability that resulted from years of consistent performance and boundary maintenance in work contexts. The paid leave and schedule modification that were offered reflected mutual respect and reciprocal support rather than one-sided accommodation. The Employee Assistance Program counselor provided additional guidance for balancing family emergency response with continued commitment to personal well-being and professional responsibilities. The consultation emphasized that appropriate family support during genuine crisis could demonstrate healthy relationship values while maintaining protection against future exploitation attempts. The medical expenses that ultimately required family financial assistance totaled approximately $8,000 for specialized cardiac rehabilitation and prescription medications that exceeded insurance coverage limitations. The documented medical necessity and transparent cost breakdown provided clear justification for family financial support that served genuine health needs rather than discretionary spending preferences. The contribution that I provided toward these legitimate medical expenses represented application of my boundary framework in context of authentic family emergency, rather than manufactured crisis designed to manipulate financial assistance. The structured approach included documentation requirements, transparent communication about resource allocation, and acknowledgement of my generosity that demonstrated respect for my financial autonomy. The family appreciation that was expressed for my medical expense assistance included genuine recognition of my sacrifice and commitment to family well-being despite months of relationship conflict that had been created by their exploitation patterns. The acknowledgement represented progress toward mutual respect that could support continued relationship improvement based on healthy interaction patterns. The recovery process that followed my father's hospitalization revealed sustained family commitment to modified communication patterns that honored my boundary requirements while maintaining connections based on mutual care rather than resource extraction. The medical crisis had created motivation for authentic relationship healing that transcended immediate financial considerations. The perspective that emerged from this medical emergency was that appropriate family support during genuine crisis could strengthen boundary enforcement by demonstrating the distinction between legitimate assistance and exploitation, while building trust through consistent application of healthy relationship principles. The experience validated that boundary setting served everyone's long-term interests by preserving resources for authentic needs while preventing manipulation that benefited no one involved. The 3 months following my father's cardiac rehabilitation marked a period of sustained relationship improvement that demonstrated the possibility for genuine family healing when exploitation patterns were replaced with mutual respect and transparent communication. The medical crisis had served as a catalyst for authentic relationship evaluation, while providing concrete framework for appropriate financial assistance that served legitimate needs rather than enabling irresponsible behavior or manipulative resource extraction. The family financial planning system that had emerged during the medical emergency evolved into a structured approach for addressing future assistance requests that included documentation requirements, transparent communication about resource allocation, and shared responsibility among family members rather than automatic assumption that I would bear primary financial burden for all family needs. This systematic approach prevented emotional manipulation while ensuring that genuine requirements received appropriate support. Isabella's role as family financial coordinator represented significant evolution in family dynamics as she assumed responsibility for researching assistance options, documenting legitimate needs, and facilitating communication that prevented misunderstandings or manipulation attempts that had characterized previous family financial interactions. Her willingness to serve as neutral administrator created accountability that protected everyone's interests while maintaining family connections. The monthly family financial meetings that Isabella organized provided structured opportunity for discussing potential assistance needs while maintaining transparency about individual financial capacity and resource allocation priorities. These meetings included agenda items, documentation requirements, and decision-making protocols that prevented crisis-driven resource depletion while ensuring that authentic emergencies received prompt attention and appropriate support. Marcus's participation in these financial planning meetings demonstrated gradual recognition of his previous entitlement attitudes, while developing understanding of the sacrifice and planning required to maintain family financial assistance capacity. His acknowledgement of the BMW incident as poor judgment that had violated trust represented important progress toward relationship healing based on accountability rather than continued minimization or blame shifting. The therapeutic progress that continued during this period of family relationship improvement provided essential support for maintaining boundary consistency while navigating the emotional complexity of renewed family connection. Dr. Mitchell emphasized that sustainable relationship healing required extended time for new patterns to become established rather than immediate return to previous interaction levels that might enable renewed exploitation patterns. The support group sessions during this period included sharing my experience of family relationship improvement with members who were earlier in their boundary-setting journey, while receiving continued guidance from individuals whose families had achieved stable relationship modifications. The reciprocal support demonstrated that boundary enforcement could result in improved family connections rather than permanent estrangement when implemented consistently with appropriate professional guidance. The workplace performance during this period reflected the emotional stability and reduced stress that resulted from improved family relationships while maintaining appropriate boundaries that protected my professional advancement and personal well-being. The increased focus and energy that became available through resolution of family conflict contributed to project leadership opportunities and recognition that enhanced career prospects. The employee mentorship program that I joined during this period provided opportunity for supporting junior colleagues while developing leadership capabilities that extended beyond technical expertise to include interpersonal skills and boundary management that could benefit other professionals navigating family financial pressure. The mentoring relationship demonstrated practical application of boundary-setting principles in professional development contexts. The home ownership experience continued to provide foundation for personal autonomy while creating space for hosting family gatherings that operated according to modified interaction patterns. The holiday celebrations and birthday parties that I organized in my home demonstrated that boundary enforcement could coexist with family connection while establishing my role as equal family member rather than primary resource provider. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.